Daddy, we've got matching same tattoos, Maid's toddler daughter said to Ruthless Billionaire. Daddy, look. We the same. The tiny voice cut through the marble silence of the Bennett estate like a bell striking noon, sharp, sweet, and impossible to ignore. Lucas Bennett stopped walking. He had been striding down the east corridor with the energy of a man who had 14 meetings before lunch and zero patience for interruptions. His charcoal suit was pressed to perfection. His jaw was set in that particular way his executive team had learned to fear, the look that meant don't speak unless spoken to. He had just ended a call that cost a competitor $3 million and hadn't blinked once. He was not a man who stopped walking. And yet he stopped. In the sunlit archway that separated the kitchen hall from the formal sitting room, a small child stood with her arms stretched up into the air. She couldn't have been more than 3 years old. She was wearing a tiny yellow dress with a white daisy on the front, and her dark curls were pulled into 2 lopsided pigtails that someone had tried very hard to make even. Her brown eyes were enormous, wide with wonder, sparkling with a kind of uncomplicated joy that adults spend decades trying to find again.
She was pointing at him.
More specifically, she was pointing at his forearm. Lucas looked down. On the inside of his left forearm, just below his rolled-up sleeve, was his tattoo. He'd had it for 11 years. A single compass rose, clean black lines, no color, no flourish. Small enough to cover with a watch, but large enough to see when he worked without his jacket. He almost never thought about it anymore. It had become as ordinary to him as breathing. But the little girl was grinning at it like she'd just found buried treasure. We the same, Daddy, she announced again, louder this time, as if maybe he hadn't heard her the first time. And then she did something that would rearrange something deep and unnamed inside Lucas Bennett's chest. She pulled up the sleeve of her little yellow dress. On her tiny forearm, drawn in what was clearly washable marker, already slightly smudged from a morning of living, was a compass rose. Wobbly, lopsided, missing one of the arrow points entirely, but unmistakably, earnestly, a compass rose.
Just like his.
Lucas stared at it. He didn't speak. He wasn't sure he could. Clara. The voice came from the kitchen, urgent, horrified, the voice of a woman who had just realized something had gone terribly wrong. Clara, baby, come here right now. Sofia Ramirez appeared in the archway half a second later, dish towel still in her hands, her dark hair escaping from its bun, her expression cycling rapidly through panic, mortification, and the particular brand of helpless embarrassment that only mothers of toddlers truly understand. She was 28 years old and had worked in the Bennett estate for almost a year. She was quiet, efficient, invisible in the way that good household staff learn to be, not because anyone demanded it, but because Sofia had learned early that invisibility was its own kind of armor. She arrived before sunrise and stayed until the evening. She worked hard and asked for nothing except her paycheck, which she split every month between rent, groceries, and Clara's daycare. Clara, however, had not yet learned the art of invisibility. Mr. Bennett, I am so sorry, Sofia began, reaching for her daughter, her voice tight with apology. She's not supposed to be here today. Her daycare called and said there was a water main issue and I couldn't get a sitter, and I thought I was so careful. She was with me in the kitchen the whole morning. I don't know how she... How long has she been here? Sofia blinked. His voice wasn't angry. She didn't know what it was exactly, but it wasn't angry. Since about 7 this morning, sir. I kept her in the kitchen. I brought her coloring books and her juice box and her stuffed rabbit. She's been so good. She really has. This has never happened before, and I promise it won't. I mean, how long has she been working on that? Sofia followed his gaze to Clara's arm. She exhaled slowly. I'm not sure. I left her alone for maybe 20 minutes while I finished the East Wing bathrooms. She had her markers. Sofia rubbed her forehead. I'm so sorry. I'll wash it off immediately. Don't. The word came out before Lucas fully understood why he'd said it. Sofia looked up at him. He was still looking at Clara. The little girl, entirely unconcerned by the tension swirling around her, had toddled 2 steps closer to Lucas and was now examining his real tattoo with the focused concentration of a tiny art critic. She reached out one small finger and, very gently, very seriously, touched the compass rose on his arm. "Mine is a Owie," she said gravely, pointing at the missing arrow on hers. "I messed it." "Yeah," Lucas said. His voice came out quieter than usual. "You did a little." "But it's still the same," Clara insisted. She looked up at him with those enormous brown eyes, completely certain, completely unafraid. "We match. Like family." Lucas Bennett had built an empire from nothing. He had sat across negotiating tables from men twice his age and made them flinch. He had buried his mother, buried his mentor, survived betrayals that would have destroyed lesser men. He had not cried in 11 years, not since the night he got the tattoo, not since the reason he got it. He did not cry now either. But something shifted in his chest. Something that had been sealed shut for a very long time moved, just slightly, like a door that hadn't been opened in years, disturbed by an unexpected knock. "Like family," he repeated softly. Clara nodded, solemn and sure. And Sofia Ramirez stood in the archway watching the most feared man in the city kneel down to the marble floor until he was eye level with her 3-year-old daughter, and she felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. She felt like maybe, just maybe, they weren't entirely alone in the world. Lucas Bennett was not born ruthless. That was the part the newspapers never got right. The financial press loved their version of him, the ice-cold titan who'd built Bennett Industries from a two-room startup into a global real estate and development empire worth $11 billion. They loved the quotes from rivals he'd outmaneuvered, the stories about boardroom confrontations, the photographs of him leaving buildings in expensive suits with an expression that suggested he'd just devoured someone whole and found it mildly satisfying. The Glacier, one magazine had called him. "The man who doesn't need anyone," said another. He'd never corrected them. The truth was less dramatic and more painful. Lucas Bennett had simply learned, at a very young age, that needing people was the most expensive thing a person could do. He grew up in Dayton, Ohio, in a narrow house that always smelled faintly of cigarette smoke and something else, something harder to name, the smell of a household held together by exhaustion and willpower, and not much else. His mother, Patricia, had worked 2 jobs for most of his childhood. She was funny and fierce and made the best Sunday breakfasts in the world, and she was almost never home. His father had been gone since Lucas was 4, not dead, just gone, the kind of gone that doesn't leave a forwarding address. Lucas had filled the silence with ambition. He studied because books didn't leave. He worked because money didn't disappear without warning. He built because building meant having something no one could take back. The tattoo had come later. He was 22, fresh out of a state school on a full academic scholarship, 18 months into his first real job and burning through it like rocket fuel. He'd gotten it the night his mentor died, a man named Donald Hale, who had been the first person to look at young Lucas Bennett and say, "I see something in you worth investing in." Donald had died of a heart attack at 61. Quietly. No fanfare. Lucas had driven to a tattoo parlor at midnight and asked for a compass rose because Donald used to say the same thing every time Lucas doubted himself. "You already know which way is north, son. Trust it." He had never told anyone the story behind the tattoo. Not his ex-girlfriend of 3 years, not his business partner, not the profile writer from Forbes who had asked about it directly and received a one-word answer. Personal. But somehow, inexplicably, he had just knelt on the floor of his own hallway and told it to a 3-year-old girl in a yellow dress. Not in words. He hadn't said any of it aloud. But Clara had looked at him with those wide, serious eyes after he'd crouched down to her level, and she'd patted his arm gently and said, "It's a star that points home," and something about those 6 words had cracked him open just enough to let a little light in. It's a star that points home. He stood in his office now, an hour after the encounter, staring out at the Manhattan skyline. His coffee was cold. His next meeting was in 4 minutes. His phone had buzzed 11 times since he sat down. He was thinking about a child's drawing on a small arm. He pressed the intercom. James. His assistant appeared in the doorway within seconds, tablet in hand. James was 26, efficient, and had learned to read Lucas's silences the way sailors read weather. Sir? Sophia Ramirez. How long has she worked here? A brief pause while James checked. 11 months, sir. Started last April. She came through the Hale staffing agency. James looked up. Excellent performance record. Mrs. Chun from housekeeping calls her one of the best she's had. Never late, never a complaint. And the daughter? The daycare situation today was a one-time issue. The facility had a maintenance closure. She's listed as a single mother on her emergency contact form. No other household contacts on file. Lucas was quiet for a moment. Tell Mrs. Chun that if the daycare situation comes up again, Clara is welcome to stay with her mother during the workday. Set up the small reading room off the kitchen as a space for her. Get some age-appropriate books, something to color with. Make it comfortable. James stared at him. Sir? You heard me. Yes, sir. Absolutely. James typed quickly. Then, carefully. Anything else? Lucas turned back to the window. Find out where Donald Hale's family donated his papers after he passed. I've been meaning to reach out for years. James didn't ask why. He had worked for Lucas long enough to know that today, for reasons that had nothing to do with business and everything to do with a small child and a smudged compass rose, something had changed. He simply nodded and closed the door. Lucas stood alone in the skyline light, and for the first time in years, the silence in his chest felt less like emptiness and more like the moment just before something begins. Sophia Ramirez had spent the entire afternoon waiting to be fired. She'd scrubbed the third-floor guest bathroom tiles until they shone like mirrors. She'd refolded every linen closet shelf in the West Wing. She'd cleaned the kitchen twice. All the while, Clara sat contentedly in the corner with her rabbit and her coloring books, utterly unaware that she'd potentially just dismantled her mother's entire life in the space of 30 seconds by pointing at a billionaire's arm. We match. Like family. Sophia had wanted to sink through the marble floor. She loved her daughter with a fierceness that sometimes scared her, this wild, bottomless love that made her capable of things she never knew she could do. She'd left her hometown of El Paso at 23 with a 2-year-old and a duffel bag and a phone number for a staffing agency in New York because staying had stopped being safe and going had stopped being optional.
She didn't talk about that.
She'd learned to carry it quietly, the way you carry something heavy, efficiently, without drawing attention to the weight. New York had been brutal at first. Then gradually, painstakingly, it had become possible. Then something close to home. This job had been the turning point. The pay was fair. The hours were consistent. Mrs. Chun was stern but kind. The estate was enormous and impeccably organized, and Sophia had slipped into its routines like water finding its level, efficient, invisible, reliable. She had also been very careful never to have feelings about Lucas Bennett. This was not difficult because Lucas Bennett was not a man who invited feelings. He was rarely in the same room as the household staff long enough for feelings to form. He was a presence more than a person. The schedule on the board, the preferences in the housekeeping manual, the silhouette passing through the corridor with a phone at his ear. Professional distance was not a rule here. It was simply the natural state of things, like weather. What had happened this morning in the hallway was not professional distance. It was her daughter's tiny hand patting the arm of the most powerful man in New York, and the most powerful man in New York going very still and very quiet in a way that looked, to Sophia's practiced eye, less like anger and more like something she didn't have a word for.
Don't.
He had said it when she offered to wash off the marker.
Don't.
She was still turning that word over in her mind at 4 o'clock when Mrs. Chun appeared in the kitchen doorway. James came by, Mrs. Chun said, in the particular neutral tone she used when she was delivering information she hadn't fully processed herself. He left a message from Mr. Bennett. Sophia straightened. Her stomach tightened. He said the reading room off the kitchen is going to be set up as a space for Clara, for when the daycare situation comes up. Mrs. Chen paused. He also said to let you know that today was handled well. Sophia stared at her. He said, what? That today was handled well. Mrs. Chen raised an eyebrow. I've worked for this household for 9 years, and I can count on one hand the number of times Mr. Bennet has sent a message like that to staff. She looked at Sophia with an expression that was equal parts curiosity and warning. I don't know what happened in that hallway this morning, but whatever it was, be careful with it. Sophia nodded. Her throat felt strange. After Mrs. Chen left, she looked over at Clara, who had fallen asleep in the reading corner, curled around her stuffed rabbit with one cheek pressed to the floor and her lopsided pigtails fanned around her head like a dark halo. On her tiny arm, the smudged compass rose was already beginning to fade. Sophia sat down slowly on the kitchen floor next to her daughter. She drew her knees up to her chest and watched Clara breathe, the steady, trusting rise and fall of a child who had never learned to expect the worst from the world.
How?
Sophia thought. How are you not afraid of anything? She already knew the answer. Clara hadn't yet been taught to be. She moved through the world with her arms open, offering herself to it without reservation, naming connections wherever she found them. Daddy, family, the same. Filling in the shapes of things she needed with whatever materials were available. Sophia had tried so hard to protect her from disappointment, from reaching for people who wouldn't hold on. And yet here they were, in the kitchen of a billionaire who had just cleared a room for her daughter because her daughter had pointed at a tattoo and said, "We match." Sophia leaned her head back against the cabinet. Outside the kitchen window, Manhattan hummed and glittered in the afternoon light, indifferent and magnificent. Be careful with it, Mrs. Chen had said. Sophia closed her eyes. She was already too late for that. It happened on a Thursday. Sophia arrived for her early shift to find the small room off the kitchen, previously used for overflow storage, stacked with extra linens and cleaning supplies, completely transformed. The supplies were gone. In their place, a low child's bookshelf, painted white, stocked with picture books and board books and early reader titles. A small round table with 2 chairs, sized for a toddler. A soft rug in a warm yellow, patterned with stars. A beanbag in the corner, green and plump as a frog. A box of quality colored markers and a stack of thick drawing paper, neatly squared. And on the little bookshelf, between a copy of Goodnight Moon and the Very Hungry Caterpillar, was a single new book with a glossy cover. Stars That Point Home. A book about compass roses and finding your way. Sophia stood in the doorway for a long moment. She didn't hear him approach. He moved more quietly than a man of his authority had any right to, but she felt the shift in the air that meant someone was behind her, and she turned to find Lucas Bennet standing a few feet away, coffee in hand, watching her with an expression she couldn't read.
Good morning, he said.
Good morning, Mr. Bennet. She stepped back from the doorway. Clara is going to, she stopped. She didn't quite have the words. Thank you. He nodded once, the way he acknowledged most things, brief, efficient. But he didn't move to leave. The book, he said after a moment. In case she asks. About what a compass rose is. She will, Sophia said. She asks about everything. Something at the corner of his mouth shifted. Not quite a smile, more like the ghost of one. The place where a smile might eventually learn to live. I noticed, he said. A silence settled between them, but not the usual kind, not the professional distance silence that was really just invisible walls. This was different.
Softer.
The kind of silence that has room in it for something more. Sophia broke it first, because she had learned not to trust silences that felt too good. Can I ask your tattoo? Clara keeps talking about it. She hesitated. She made me read her about compass roses online last night. She's very committed. Lucas looked down at his forearm for a moment. Then, to Sophia's considerable surprise, he answered. Not in brief. Not in deflection. He told her about Donald Hale, not everything, not the deep grief of it, but the shape of the story. The mentor, the loss, the midnight parlor. You already know which way is north, son.
Trust it.
He told it the way people tell things they've been carrying alone for too long, carefully at first, then with the relief of something finally being set down. Sophia listened without speaking. She understood the particular weight of stories like that. She had a few of her own. When he finished, she said quietly, "She told me it was a star that points home."
Clara did.
When I asked her what she drew on her arm, Lucas was still for a moment.
"She's 3, he said.
"I know." Sophia smiled just a little. She's been doing things like that her whole life. Saying the exact right thing with absolutely no idea that it's the exact right thing. "That must be something," he said. And the way he said it, not politely but genuinely, told Sophia that he meant it. "It's the best thing," she said. He left a few minutes later. But that afternoon, when Sophia brought Clara to the estate because the daycare had a half day, the little girl walked into the reading room and stood very still in the middle of the star rug, turning in a slow circle, eyes enormous. "Mama," she breathed. "Someone made this for me." "Someone did," Sophia said. "Is it the daddy with the tattoo?" Sophia's heart did something complicated. "His name is Mr. Bennett, baby." Clara considered this with great seriousness. "He made me a whole room," she said finally, as if this settled something important. "He's good." She climbed into the beanbag with stars that point home and began to flip through the pages with the focused energy of someone doing important research. And Sophia stood in the doorway of the yellow star room, in the estate that had started to feel, against all reason, like something more than a workplace, and thought, "He is." December arrived the way it always does in New York, too fast, too cold, and too beautiful to resent. The Bennett estate went through its seasonal transformation, garlands along the banisters, tasteful white lights in the front windows, a 12-foot tree in the formal sitting room that Mrs. Chen's team decorated with the precision of a military operation. Lucas had not personally participated in the decoration of his own home in years. He signed off on the service, paid the invoice, and continued working through December the same way he worked through every other month. But this December had Clara Ramirez in it. She had become, over the past 2 months, a small and glittering constant in the estate's rhythms. Her reading room was the first place she headed every day her mother brought her in. She had, by Mrs. Chen's bemused count, read stars that point home no fewer than 40 times and could now explain a compass rose to any adult who stood still long enough. She had also made it her personal mission to draw compass roses on every available piece of drawing paper, which she then gifted to members of the household staff with great ceremony. She had given one to James, who had put it on his desk. She had given one to the estate's chef, Ramon, who had laminated his. She had given one to Mrs. Chen, who had accepted it with the solemnity it deserved. She had not yet given one to Lucas. Sophia had noticed this. She suspected Clara was waiting for the right moment with the particular patience of small children who understand, instinctively, without being told, that some offerings have to be timed perfectly. The moment came on a Tuesday afternoon, 11 days before Christmas. Lucas had come home from a cancelled flight, his London trip postponed by a winter storm, and was in the kitchen pouring coffee when Clara appeared in the doorway of the reading room with a rolled piece of drawing paper in her small fist and an expression of immense personal gravity. "I made you something," she announced. Lucas set down his coffee cup. "Did you?" "It's important," Clara said. She walked to him with the deliberate confidence of a diplomat presenting a treaty. She stopped in front of him and held out the roll of paper. He took it, unrolled it carefully. It was a compass rose, her most accomplished one yet, for clean arrows. Most of the points present. The lines wobbled slightly, but they wobbled with conviction. In the center, in large, careful, slightly backwards letters, she had written Lucas. Not Mr. Bennett. Not the daddy with the tattoo. Lucas. He looked at it for a long moment. "You spelled my name," he said. Mama helped with the letters, Clara said honestly. But I did the whole drawing myself. It's yours because you already have one on your arm, but now you have one for me. She paused, then added, with the air of someone bestowing a great honor. You can put it on your desk. I will, he said. He wasn't sure when he decided to mean it, but he meant it. Clara studied him. She had Sophia's seriousness when she looked at something important, that same steady, measuring quality, like a person who wanted to understand a thing all the way down before committing to it. Are you lonely? She asked. Lucas blinked. Why do you ask that? Because your house is really big and you live in it alone, Clara said, with the blunt accuracy that children deploy like precision instruments. And sometimes when I come in here, you look like you forgot what home feels like. The kitchen was very quiet. Outside, snow was beginning to fall on Manhattan. The first real snow of the season, fat and slow and indifferent to the way certain sentences could stop time. Clara, Sophia said from the hallway doorway, her voice soft and gentle and careful. She had clearly been standing there long enough to have heard. It's okay, Mama, Clara said. She looked back up at Lucas with those enormous eyes. You can come to our home sometime, she said simply. We have tamales at Christmas. Mama makes the best ones. You wouldn't be lonely there. Lucas Bennett stood in his $12 million kitchen in his $12 million estate, holding a child's drawing of a compass rose with his own name written in the middle of it, and understood, with a clarity that no boardroom had ever given him, that this small girl had walked past every wall he'd ever built and hadn't noticed they were there. I'd like that, he said. He looked up and found Sophia standing in the doorway. Her eyes were bright, and her hands were pressed together in front of her, and she was trying very hard to maintain the composure of a professional in a professional setting. She wasn't entirely succeeding. Neither, for the first time in 11 years, was he. Merry Christmas, Lucas, Clara said, already turning back toward her beanbag and her books, the matter settled to her complete satisfaction. The snow fell. The compass rose waited on the counter between them, and somewhere in the locked room in Lucas Bennett's chest, the door opened, fully, finally, all the way, and the warmth that had been waiting on the other side of it came flooding in. Christmas morning in the Bennett estate had never felt like Christmas before. It had always felt like a well-managed pause, a holiday acknowledged with appropriate decor and an appropriate gift to the staff and appropriate food arranged by the appropriate caterer. Efficient. Graceless. The Christmas of a man who had learned to mark occasions without feeling them. This year was different. The difference had dark curls and a yellow dress, and an absolutely non-negotiable belief that Christmas required the following. One handmade paper chain garland. Clara had made it herself over 3 days, with Mrs. Chen's quiet assistance, tamales, hot chocolate with lots of the little marshmallows, and at least one viewing of the Polar Express, which was, according to Clara, essential. Lucas had agreed to all of it. He stood in his own formal sitting room, the one with the 12-foot tree and the tasteful white lights, and watched it become unrecognizable in the best possible way. Clara had hung the paper chain around the base of the tree with the careful pride of a master decorator. Ramon had produced tamales from the kitchen with a grin that suggested he'd been waiting years for someone to finally request real food in this house. James had sourced the specific brand of mini marshmallows after a surprisingly earnest 10-minute research session. Sophia stood near the window in a soft red sweater, watching her daughter assess the placement of a paper chain segment with immense creative seriousness, and she was smiling in a way that changed the whole room. Lucas had been watching that smile for most of the morning. He crossed to the window and stood beside her. Outside, Central Park lay white and still under the night snowfall, silver in the winter light. She's been planning this for 2 weeks, Sophia said quietly. The paper chain. She counted the links every night before bed. How many did she end up with? 63. Sophia's smile widened. She was very specific about 63. Why 63? I have no idea. She laughed, soft, real, the laugh of someone who had forgotten for a moment to be careful. With Clara, the The reason is never the part that matters. The doing is the part that matters. Lucas watched Clara drape a final loop of paper chain over a low branch, stand back, and give a satisfied nod. She told me I looked like I forgot what home feels like, he said. Sophia glanced at him. I know. I'm sorry. She doesn't have a... She was right. A pause. Lucas. I'm not saying it to make you uncomfortable, he said. He turned to look at her directly, a thing he had been doing more often over the past months, a thing that felt different now than it had when she was simply a member of his household staff, and he was simply her employer. I'm saying it because she was right, and I haven't said it out loud to anyone yet, and I think it's probably time I did. Sophia looked at him with those serious eyes. She's good at that, she said finally. Finding the things people haven't said yet. She gets it from her mother. The color that moved across Sophia's face was not quite embarrassment, and not quite something else. It was the particular warm uncertainty of someone who had stopped expecting good things and was not entirely sure yet that it was safe to start again. Can I tell you something? She said. Always. She looked out at the snow. When I came to New York, I made a decision. That Clara and I were enough. That we were our own whole thing, our own family, and we didn't need anyone else to be complete. She paused. I believed that. I still believe it. But complete isn't the same as full, she said quietly. And I didn't understand the difference until we ended up here. Lucas was quiet for a moment. The snow fell. The paper chain glittered on the tree. Donald used to say, he said slowly, that a compass doesn't tell you where you are. It tells you which way you're facing. He glanced down at his forearm. I spent a long time thinking north meant further.
More. Bigger.
Higher. He looked at her. I was facing the wrong direction. Sophia turned to him fully. The right direction for what? She asked, and the question was careful and open and brave in the way that Sophia did most things, even the terrifying ones. He reached out and took her hand. Not dramatically, just simply, the way you take hold of something you've finally decided not to let go of.
Home, he said.
Mama. Lucas. Come look, come look. Clara appeared between them, grabbing a hand from each of them, pulling them toward the tree with the full-body commitment of a child who has something important to show. You have to stand right here to see it right. She positioned them carefully in front of the tree, one adult on each side of her, her two hands in their two hands, and pointed up at the paper chain looping around the base. See, she said triumphantly. It goes all the way around. It connects. Lucas looked at the paper chain. Then he looked across Clara's curly head at Sophia, who was already looking back at him, her eyes bright with everything she hadn't said yet and everything she would. It does, he said. Clara beamed. I told you, she said, with the magnificent certainty of someone who has never had any doubt. We're a family. We match. And in a warm, paper-chained light of a Christmas morning that smelled like tamales and hot chocolate and possibility, Lucas Bennett, who had built walls instead of homes, who had chosen north to mean away instead of toward, who had carried a compass rose on his skin for 11 years without understanding what it was really pointing at, looked at a woman who had walked into his estate with armor on her heart and her whole life in her hands, and her 3-year-old daughter, who had never once been afraid to reach for what she loved. And he understood, finally, completely, with the kind of clarity that only comes from stopping walking long enough to look down, that he had always known which way was north. He had just needed someone to point it out. The end. You already know which way is north, son. Trust it. Donald Hale.